Welcome to the 384th episode of the Jami Dulaney Plant-Based Wellness Podcast. My name is Jami Dulaney, and I'm your host. I'm a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete living in Southwest Florida, and I just put a 50-mile race in the books. Spoiler alert, I'm alive. It was quite interesting. Had a great time. We're going to talk all about it today. It is... At the time of this recording, it is Wednesday, so I am 4 days out and feeling pretty good. Walked a couple of miles each day, not ready to run. Happy to report that no injuries. I had my usual toenail issue, but just one for the most part, so I think it was a great success. This was the Brazos Bend 50-mile race in Texas, just about 45 minutes west of Houston. They had a 5K, a 10K, a 25K, a 50-mile race, and a 100K race. The 50-miler and the 100K, which is 62.2 miles, did the same loops. There was a little extra loop for the 100K to tack on to get that 12 extra miles. But we did 3 loops of 16.8 miles. And it was pretty much flat. I'll post some pictures on plant-based striders. It was hard-packed fire road type trails. Pretty wide, really, for the most part, and they circled around lakes, and true to the description, there were alligators, lots of alligators. It is alligator mating season. Rob Goyen, who's the race director, I hope to have him on the podcast at some time, gave a pre-race talk, and he said that there may be alligators on the trail when it warms up, and don't go up to them. And if you don't jump over them because they can flap their head up and grab you. And if you're going to go around the tail end because they can't turn as quickly. So I took comfort in that if I saw an alligator, I would go around the tail end and everything would be okay. And I hoped that I wouldn't find one on the trail. Someone did. There was a picture of someone posted that there was one laying across the road. Plenty on the side. Again, we started out in the dark, and with the headlights shining into the water, you could see their eyes reflecting in some portions. You could also hear this alligator mating call, which is this very deep, it sounds like a very loud cross between a bullfrog and a cow bellowing. So we heard lots of that in the dark. Lots of birds. There were some really beautiful birds, different species. One, he said, looked like a pelican, but wasn't a pelican. Looked like a flamingo, pink flamingo, but it wasn't a pink flamingo. Very, very pretty. So lots of scenery. You felt like you were in an Audubon soundtrack to some degree, running through, and the sun came up. And there's a lot of people posted some really pretty pictures. Very, very green. Texas has got a lot more rain than Florida, so it was so pretty to see all the green and some flowers along the way. And the trails were marked very good. There were 4 aid stations, 3 out on the course, 1 as you came through the loops. The volunteers, Rob Goyen puts on a fabulous race, trail racing over Texas. Again, kudos. It's the second race we've run of his. But the people that worked at the aid station, for the most part, were runners. They knew what people needed. They attended to their needs. They were very helpful, very pleasant, very happy. They had various sodas, including Coca-Cola, on the table. They had electrolyte solution without calories. They had some Gatorade. They had plain water. They had tons of ice. Big ice chests. They never ran out. They had a bucket of ice water to dip a towel in if you wanted to. There were cookies, Skittles, M&Ms, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, peanut butter or Nutella sandwiches. Later in the race, they did a quesadilla with cheese. They also did mashed potatoes. So being plant-based, I had probably 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, but I'm getting ahead of myself before I go into talking about what I ate. But for the most part, I used their water, their ice, their PB&J, and some wonderful mashed potatoes at the end. But as we start, besides gators, we had an armadillo walk in front of us, and we see those in Florida from time to time, but I hadn't seen one cross in front of me about 10 yards, and he took his time. They also had a plastic gator at one of the turns, to kind of make people jump. That was on, like it stuck out. I jumped the 4th time, so I knew exactly where it was, but I still jumped. The funniest part was on one of the loops coming back along the lake, or one of the lakes. I was kind of looking to the right. There was water on both sides, more like a lagoon on the right and a lake on the left. And I was kind of looking to the right. We would train for Ironman along a canal, and you'd always look in the canal and see the gators, but you knew darn well that there was gators on the other side. So I was kind of looking on the other side, but I was also kind of zoning out as I was running at that time. And all of a sudden I jumped and screamed. There was this giant log, and I thought it was a gator coming out. I mean, it would have been a monstrous gator had it been a real gator. But I jumped and screamed enough to scare Michael and to scare the lady behind me, and she stopped, and, I got a hold of myself, and then we laughed a lot and went on. But we took a little tent. A lot of people set up tents at the start line, so we brought one in Friday. Just, pop tents, where, like a beach tent so that you could sit under if you wanted to come between the loops. The clock's always running, but you can take your time. I think the cutoff for the entire race was 9 o'clock at night. We started at 6 a.m. Like I said, we put a tarp down, and we had a little flyover tent that we put up that had blue whales. We got it to share with Caleb. We did forget our camp chairs. But we did decide to set up our nutrition, so the plan was to come through and grab the nutrition we needed for the 16.8 mile loop and head on out. What is tricky with an ultra, if you've done marathons before, usually there's aid stations about every 3 miles, and they have water, Gatorade, and a couple of them may have goo. But in ultra events, the aid stations are much fewer, mainly because it's in the woods and it's harder to get supplies in, and they're spread out. So these aid stations were somewhere between 4 and 6 miles apart. So you needed enough water to get you between aid stations, and then you could carry what you wanted if you didn't want to eat what was on the aid station. So again, being plant-based and knowing that I wasn't going to eat cookies and I wasn't going to eat M&Ms, and I really don't eat I used to eat Skittles when I did a marathon, but I didn't really think I wanted any more sugary stuff other than the goos that I know I can tolerate, or the gels. I packed Ziplocs. I packed 3 Ziplocs for each loop, and so I had a variety of gels. And I had a Peter Rabbit pouch that's, baby food type banana strawberry one. And I had some mandarin oranges in the little cups in each one. And I had my Betty Lou Big Newton type bars in each one. And so that was what I had planned to take in for nutrition. I knew I'd probably have some peanut butter and jelly along the way. I wasn't sure how, it would be, how I would handle it. I always have Coca-Cola during the races. I was planned on trying to not take any Coke until it was later in the race, just because, again, you start to get the bubbly. I don't drink Coke any other time. It starts to not set well after a while, and all the extra caffeine that I wasn't sure that I wanted. But I knew I would be taking in some. They said they would have potatoes on the course, so I was hopeful for that because I thought that would be good. And they did end up having mashed potatoes at the mile 45, and I believe they might have had them at the mile 46 aid station, or not mile 45, and then it must have been 48. There was an aid station that was closer in that you could have stopped at. But I had the mashed potatoes out there, and it was funny because I said, these are really salty, and I'll kind of get into that a little bit later. But they said, no, we didn't put any salt in them, but I assumed they were boxed mashed potatoes that had a tremendous amount of sodium in it. And it tasted, I tasted salt first, potatoes second. But after being out on the course, and they were warm and very smooth, and they were actually delicious. The peanut butter and jelly wasn't as exciting for me as it was the last race. I had a couple, but nevertheless, I had those. We had talked to Addie and Nathan and Caleb were going to come out for the finish, and thought we could have a picnic. We had all these grand ideas of grandeur, so Addie was going to make a pasta salad from our cookbook. I thought that would be great for finish food. We could sit under the tent and have a picnic, and they could have their picnic before we got there. And Caleb came and had his little tricycle, and everything would be good. The food that we didn't have that I wish maybe I would have made some rice balls. Or maybe even had the miso and some noodles to have. I don't know. I might try that in the future. It got to the point where I would have liked to have had something savory. I did think my calorie intake was pretty good. I wore Newton trail shoes. They're a little bit more sturdy than the Newton road shoes. They were fine. My feet didn't hurt at all. I was surprised. I figured my feet would ache at least. Even in a marathon, sometimes the bottom of your feet will ache a little bit, but I had absolutely no discomfort in my feet at all. I knew I was having a little bit of a toenail issue on my second toes, but it wasn't anything, I've had a lot worse on 15-mile training runs, so that I was pleased about. It's been dry the last week or so there, so the trails were really, really dusty, and there was, a little bit of a sand kicking up from the road. So I did change my shoes after the second loop and socks, clean my feet up. I don't know if that made a difference or not. At least I got to look at my feet. They looked fine then, so there was nothing alarming as far as my toe or toenails, nothing I had to do. I had brought a first aid kit thinking that if I was getting big blisters under my toenails, I'd go ahead and pop it before I went out, but I didn't, see the need to do that and put my new shoes and socks on. I had two pair of the same brand of the Newton trail shoes, and I had exoskin socks that are very, very good wicking, so my feet were actually dry. And so that worked out. I brought clothes to change if it got hot, but I started in a top, very light compressed top. It was cold at the start. I'd say it was sub 50. I had arm sleeves on, and I used a Solomon vest, and I had a running cap on, and shorts, and so I was cold at the beginning, but about 40 minutes when the sun started to come out, that was okay. My hands warmed up. My Solomon vest I love. It's very light. I had on the first loop I used one flexible water bottle, and then I did a handheld carry of 24 ounces. And I put water in both of those. The second loop, I put an electrolyte. It has maltodextrin, so a complex carbohydrate sports drink called Tailwind Lemon Lime. So I made a concentrate for the second loop and used that. It was hot. I needed the third loop. I grabbed another bottle because I wasn't quite making it, or I was getting really close to running out of water between the aid stations, given the 24-ounce handheld plus that, 17, 18-ounce flexible bottle that goes into the vest. So I grabbed another one of the flexible bottles to put in for water. I didn't even end up using it. It was harder to fill. The other flexible bottle, the one flexible bottle I had, I could put ice in, and it actually stayed cold. And my handheld is insulated, so it held ice, so it stayed cold. So when the temperature actually got up into the 80s, that really was important. I couldn't tell if I was getting a little bit on the dry side or it was the dust from the roads, but I think my hydration, it might have dipped a little bit. Early on, it's, when we were running the first, say, 45 minutes in the dark, you're not quite sure about your footing. There's people around, didn't want to trip, so wasn't drinking much. Probably didn't take in all that much. Well, we got to the first aid station, and I took a peanut butter and jelly sandwich first off. So that was about mile 5 or 6 when you first got to that first aid station. In the morning, I had made some oats in the hotel room and had a banana, so that was my pre-race meal and a cup of coffee. And that's usually what I, do, either a bar or oatmeal and a banana. So that all worked out. And, once it became light, it was interesting because I knew there would be highs and lows throughout the race, but I wasn't quite sure what to expect. And I have to say that, I listened to a podcast of a woman running her first 50 miler, and she said it doesn't get much worse on the third loop than the second loop. That's what she felt. And I took some solace in that, thinking, well, okay, I know what 32 miles feels like, and if it doesn't get much worse than 32 miles, I should be fine. If I can keep that pace up. And we'd been training at a pace, and we really wanted to try to keep under 12 minutes, 11:15 to 12-minute pace running. We also wanted to keep the rest stops, the aid station times down, because that actually, that adds time to your loop time. So that was the idea, was to keep, that pace so that we could, come in around that 12-minute mile with the aid stations and everything. That was kind of the plan, knowing that we would probably slow down over time, but I felt that was a good place to start. Or a heart rate monitor. So I wasn't going to let my heart rate get up high. Michael and I made a pact that we weren't going to go out and run scared and run from the pack. We were going to hold our heart rates down. We're going to stay true to our own race, be diligent at the aid stations, get in, get out. So we thought we had a pretty good plan. The idea that was going to be no man left behind, no woman left behind. So whatever happened, we were going to stay together. And, we'd had the discussion that, unless something bad happened, we weren't going to drop out unless there was, some sort of, health issue that he's like, okay, this is stupid to keep going. So that was the plan. Again, so we made it to the first aid station, started to get light. And the first thing that happened was, I guess between the second and third aid station, maybe, went to, walk to check something a little bit. And we were going over a bridge, and I actually felt unsteady, like a little woozy. And I think at that point, maybe I was, maybe a little underhydrated, a little low on sugar. I think the stress of the unknown and the first loop and the excitement of it all, I think I used more glucose than I anticipated. But I thought, okay, I got to get some more calories in me for this, this next section between aid stations. And so that went away. Then I guess the first thing that happened to me, though, is my low back tightened. And, as anybody that listens to this podcast knows, I've had back issues over the years, and that scares me worse than anything, because if my back goes, there's not much I can do about it on the run to really make it better. And it gets to the point where walking could be an issue. And I was really fearful that might end up being, what takes me down, so to speak. And so when my back was, you fly in, and we had a little bit of a airplane experience, and the flight was longer. The flight got changed, and, different beds, not stretching like I usually do at home. And so my back was tight, and I did stretch that morning a little bit, but still it was cold. And my low back got tight, not like it was going to go out, but tight enough that I had some tightness into my upper legs a little bit. And that kind of worried me, because I thought, man, and this was really early on, I thought if this progresses, it could get ugly. But the warmer it got, the more we ran, that let up, and never came back, thankfully. I would say I'll take anything, just about, knock on wood. I never try to say that, but I felt like that was the worst thing that probably could get in my road, is if my back really locked up and I started having sciatica or something like that. But that went away. Felt great. And then the next thing, I had that little low episode of glucose. It was a little, or that wooziness, that just a little off balance, like my legs could almost give out, like I was, really underhydrated, or I don't know what it was exactly. And that didn't last very long, and that went away. I think it was probably lower on the glucose end of things, just from the excitement of it all. And then the next thing that happened, I had a discomfort in my knee that I have never had before. It was on the back side of my knee, and the kind of the medial aspect, where I've never had any issues. I've had, when I first start running, I had patellar tendonitis, and intermittently when I've fallen or something, my knee, the kneecap or something has been irritated, or I change shoes or I don't change shoes, my knees will bother me just a little bit, that it's more of a tendon type of thing. And if I stretch and change shoes, it all goes away. So I can never say I've had knee problems. But I had this cramping on the back of behind my leg, through my knee joint, right along the back. And I thought, man, this is the weirdest thing in the world. And it's like, I kept running. I never walked. I was almost afraid that if I walked, it might get worse or cramp up more. And again, a little bit, it went away. I didn't say anything about it. Much. I think after it was gone, I may have told Michael, it's like, it was the weirdest thing. My knee was so tight, but I really didn't voice any of these, or give much voice to any worries that I had because I didn't want them to be any more than something that's going to come and go and pass. I didn't want to dwell on anything like, oh no, something bad's going to happen, and oh my, we've got to change. It's like, no, we're just going to, ride this out as it's, bumps in the road, things passing. So that went away, and just was kind of enjoying things, trying to really stay on track with nutrition. The goal was about 200 calories an hour. It's a little bit more difficult. We're going slower than we usually do. In a marathon, I might try to take calories every 3 miles, but here, I knew I didn't want to get behind because it was going to be too hard to catch up. I didn't want to do too much for fear of getting sick. So, it's like, okay, we'll go for 200. When I got back the first loop, I had stuff left from my first bag, so I hadn't taken it in, but I'd taken the peanut butter and jelly. So it's like, okay, I'm still all right. I felt good. The end of the second, I guess, I ended up taking Cliff gels. And, in the past, I've done races where I've eaten the same gel the whole race, and you get sick of it. You can't look at them anymore. I've had Man races where you pull out a gel and you just put it back because it's just so nasty that you just can't swallow it. So I made sure that I saved the flavors that I like for the different gels for the races, and I spread them out into my bags. So in my bags, I'd have a Cliff gel. I like the raspberry ones. I like goo, a couple of flavors. I like the vanilla, and I like a strawberry banana. And there's a Huma gel that has chia seeds, and I like the lemon and the raspberry in that. I really like the lemon. It tastes like lemon pie. So I didn't, I spread those out so it wouldn't, I'd have one each of the loops, but not, all the good ones all the time. And I had the Cliff ones. There was a couple mocha. I can't do a lot of chocolate when it starts to get hot, but the chocolate ones or the mocha ones, I kind of like to think that I'm having a cup of coffee. And, there's some caffeine in those. So if I can get them down, they really work well for me. I had a PB&J. I probably had 2 half sandwiches throughout the day. They had Dixie cups, a half a Dixie cups full of Coke. I had several of those. I had my Tailwind lemon concentrate. I had the mashed potatoes. I had 2 of the Betty Lou bars. They were kind of hard to get down. I guess when it got hot, your stomach starts to go. I was chewing little baby bites, as I went along. They worked well. They didn't cause me any indigestion, but they were kind of hard to get down. So I ended up having like 3 lemon Humas, 2 Cliff raspberries, 2 goo vanilla, 1 or 2 of the mochas. I I had 2 of the mandarin orange cups. I had half a banana. So I figured I had about 2,200 calories for the whole race. And the time of our finish time was 13 hours and 4 seconds. And my watch said that for the 50, we ended up going a little bit longer because I'll tell you why in a second, but we went 50.45 miles and 4,300 calories. The average pace, taking in rest stops and everything that I'm about to tell you that happened, was 15 hours and 33 minutes. Our best pace was 9:33, and the worst was 17 to 18. So that's kind of where we were there, and I'll kind of go back around. But so 4,300 calories I burned per my Garmin, according to the heart rate and how it takes in, but I took in about 2,200, I would say, and that was not bad. That was like 170 per hour if you look at it, and I don't think I needed any much more than that. Like I said, I might have changed what they were a little bit. I might have had some rice, or I might try noodles in the past. I don't know. Certainly if I went longer, I'd have to do something different besides sweet. Because I think the sweet just gets to you after a while. So what happened? The first loop was 3 hours and 22 minutes. And we were extremely happy about that. That worked out well. We were right on pace. Everything looked good. The second loop took us 4 hours and 20 minutes. And the third loop was 5 hours and 22 minutes. At the end of the second loop, around mile 28:30, Michael started to get a lot of stomach cramping. And every time he'd start to run, his stomach would just knot up and he couldn't run. He took a peanut butter and jelly sandwich early. There could have been some electrolytes he took. We're not sure what caused his problems. It got hot. That's when it was starting. That's when it happened. Really don't know why his stomach shut down on him, but it shut down in a big way. He tried to take Gas X. That's usually my go-to if I get gassy. That didn't work. Nothing really worked. If he took water in, he just nothing he could do made him feel good. So after the second loop, he actually laid down on the tarp and just tried to lay down, hoping that everything would pass, so to speak, and his stomach would settle down. And so I refilled the water bottles and refilled the bags, and was around. I didn't sit down in the second between the after the first loop or at the second loop. I didn't sit down. I was a little bit afraid. I still had in the back of my head that my back might spasm if I kind of went to sit down. So I didn't sit down. So I kept walking and doing things while he was laying down, and finally said, I think we need to try and go. We had the talk, do you want to stop? And no, he didn't want to stop. And we both thought that, if he just let his stomach settle down, he would be better. And, if he could just burp and get it over with, maybe it would get better. But it really didn't get much better and kind of got worse. The last loop, you end the last loop by this, if you think about the way that the trail was, it was kind of like a clover leaf that went out and back around these different lakes. And the last one was like a long, like the stem to a flower that you went out the furthest point and then came back. And so we pretty much walked the second or the third loop. I would jog a little bit because walking really, I don't walk enough. The walking was actually harder on my hip flexors, and they were starting to get tight. That's really the only thing that I can say the last loops bothered me, was that my hip flexors from walking just felt like they wanted to cramp. And so I jogged a little bit and I actually feel better. I didn't have much of a jog, but jogging a little bit. Jogging was better than walking. And walking seemed so slow. Both of us agreed that, we were walking, because he couldn't walk much faster because he'd start to cramp up, but it's just the tenths of a mile just ticked by so slow. And Addie and Nathan and Caleb arrived, and they called us. Well, Michael said, can you have them get me a Sprite? because Sprite tends to make him better. Ginger ale wasn't doing it. So I text them and said, can you bring a Sprite when you come? And so they texted and they said they were at the finish line. So I kept texting back and say, we're at mile 43, we're at mile 44, and it was just going so slow. And I was just really worried that, he was going to get to the point of no return. And we got to the furthest aid station out there. Finally, they had some Pedialyte, and the Pedialyte has a little bit of and it's pretty weak electrolyte solution. It doesn't have much at all, but it seemed like it was enough and maybe it was just time that he was starting to get better. But the Pedialyte and some mashed potatoes seemed to help him out a little bit and made him feel a little bit better. At least gave him enough calories that he could keep, moving forward without being woozy. And, I was never worried to the point where he was going to go down, or I wouldn't have let that happen. I would have made him pull the plug, but he just, it was just miserable because he couldn't take in enough calories and couldn't run in the cramping. But we kept on going, and actually the last mile he was actually able to run some and feel better. And again, we managed to finish in 13 hours and 4 seconds. When I look back on my stats, besides what we talked about earlier, my heart rate stayed good. Early on, when I started to get a little bit that woozy feeling, my heart rate started to go up into like the 130s, and I knew that we couldn't do a faster pace than that. But really, after that, heart rate was really in the high 120s. It didn't do much over that. So I thought that was really good. The reason for that is if your heart rate goes above, if you become anaerobic and you start burning only carbohydrates as fuel, and obviously you're not taking in as much as you're burning, that's defined as the wall for the most part. So you start to become a little acidotic, and you just have to really stop. So the hotter it is, the higher your heart rate tends to go. So we had to actually slow down a little bit. In the 50-mile race, there were 104 entrants, 77 finishers. Michael and I finished 68 and 69. The oldest person on the course was 72 years of age, and he finished in 14:46. The last person in the 50-mile race finished in 15:06. There were 47 females registered, 40 finished. I was 32nd. I was the oldest female finisher by 3 years. That's good and bad. I don't feel like I need to stop. I actually want to go further, but the field is starting to lighten out, so we're just going to be paving some new territory. It's funny. Any of you that have seen me, I have white hair. I'm a mom. And you see people passing you and they kind of smile, and you're smiling, and there was a lot of young people. And I kind of, in retrospect, I kind of think when people saw us, it's like, look, those old people are doing pretty good or hanging in there. I don't know. Maybe I just thinking it that way. I really do think had Michael's stomach not shut down, we could have done the third loop in about that 4-hour mark. And so I think we have a lot of ways I think we can improve it. It wasn't a technical course, but it was a hot course. So obviously technical course, you would go slower. I sat down once. I sat down twice. I sat down to change my shoes on the tarp, and I was all right. And I got up okay. And I sat down on a cooler when Michael sat down and kind of rested on the third loop at that 45-mile aid station. And I felt my back tightening up, and I got up. It's like I was still afraid that my back was going to tighten up. I never really lost that fear. When we finally did cross the finish line and we sat down in the chairs that Addie and Nathan brought, and I went to get up, I was stiff. I got stiff like immediately. I don't know how people get up and run, and that, I guess that's something you have to practice. But, after I sat for 10 or 15 minutes, it would have been hard for me to get up and go again. So I don't know. I guess, I'm like an old horse, don't lay down or bad things happen. But So I got to figure that out a little bit. I might have to talk to my friend Harvey Lewis and see how he does that, or how people do this, come in and do, rest for 5 or 10 minutes and then get up and go. I don't know how that would work out. The unknown, I enjoyed, or I was confident in my ability to finish once I finished the second loop. I knew I was going to be okay. I knew nothing bad. I felt like nothing bad was going to happen to stop me. The first 2 loops, I was worried because I hadn't got to that point of, the unknown was still out there. Was it going to get much worse? Was it going to get worse before it started? I knew if I got through, in my mind, and that's how your head plays with you. In my mind, I took that girl's word as my gospel that the third loop wasn't going to be much worse than the second loop. I don't know this woman from Adam. I don't know what she looks like. She sounds a lot younger than me, but I took her word. I probably should try to track her down and have her on the podcast, so she'd probably get a laugh out of it. But I took her at her word that the third loop would not be worse than the second loop, much worse. And so I just wrapped my head around that. And so I knew that when I got through the second loop, I was going to be all right, because if it didn't get any worse than that, I could do it. I was worried, and I use that word, I hate that word, worry, but I was concerned and very diligent about getting to that second loop, the unknown. So I was a little bit, I heard the birds and I heard the sounds, but I was a little less relaxed probably on the first loop and a half, because I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And after those things kind of came and went, my back was tight, then my back wasn't tight, and my knee was tight, then my knee wasn't tight, and I was a little woozy, and then I wasn't woozy. Then I got kind of in the groove of, okay, things are going to come and go, but they're going to come and go, and they're not staying, so I'm okay with that. I'm going to get to the second loop, and then I'm going to be able to go on. In previous marathons, what I've always said I like about marathons is that, you have to troubleshoot and things come up. And this was, troubleshooting on steroids as far as the unknown. And my mental race plan in the beginning was, again, get to the third loop and everything will be all right. But to take it one loop at a time and to just focus on when I needed to take in hydration, when I needed to take in nutrition. And be mindful of my form, watch how I'm hitting, try to keep my back relaxed, don't get all, postured up. And so I was pretty focused on that and really didn't, relax too much until the end of the second loop. And then, unfortunately, Michael being sick kind of changed my focus from myself to him, and trying to make sure he was okay and keep him moving. So I didn't think that much about myself. I just wanted to keep him moving and keep him safe and make sure that everything was going to be all right. And so that kind of helps me. Sorry, Michael. But, I'm sure he'll say he's glad to take one for the team. But, when you take the focus off yourself and onto something else, it does make it easier. And so it kind of worked with my mental game plan. So that was, that was really what happened. In previous Ironman, you do the swim, you do the bike, you do the run. And so it breaks it up. And, in a marathon, I'm used to breaking up the mileages. So I didn't really know how to break this up other than just the way I said. And it kind of worked out pretty good. The thing that happened when we stopped, so it got in the high 80s temperature wise, and then by the time we finished it was 13 hours, so 6-7 o'clock, it's starting to cool down, and we sat down and immediately started to chill, and I had trouble getting my body temperature under control. Once I started to chill, it was kind of shaking chills, and I had it was a long time, hot shower at home at Eddie's house before, and even sweatshirt and the whole 9 yards. It took a long time to get warm. I was able to eat some of that great pasta salad when we got home. And I can say my stomach never bothered me a bit. The other funny thing that happened, I was starting to get a headache. Every once in a while I get a headache. And I think it's fluid shifts, a little dehydration from the plane or whatever. And I thought, man, what am I going to do if I get a migraine, or, a bad headache when I'm out here? But, I started running and that all went away. So I don't know, you take your mind off of something else. But, I told Michael in jest, if people suffer from headaches, maybe they should go for ultra runs, because it seemed to, I never did get that headache and didn't have one after. So that's a good thing. This actually, when I did my first marathon, my mother said, so did you get that out of your system? And I said, no, I think I want to go faster. And at the end of this 50-miler, did I get ultras out of my system? And, should I look at the roster list and say, no, I'm not going to do any more. I'm getting too old for this. No, it made me want to go longer. So there will be 100K on the books for my 60th birthday year, I think. If everything stays in place and nothing falls apart too bad. Our next race is actually in June, the Leadville Marathon at elevation, so that will be a challenge in and of itself, but I digress. What would I do different? Other than the savory food type of things, I don't think a whole lot. Like, I think, I need to think about practicing. Should I sit down, stretch, whatever, between? I don't know if that helps or not. I liked how we did our bags, so we were ready to go. I felt that was good. I felt that the hydration was really good. I might have done more walking and hill walking to kind of prepare my hip flexors for that motion as opposed to running. When you run, with that short, choppy step after you're kind of getting slow, your hips aren't moving near as much as a kind of a longer walk. So I think that's, I couldn't walk fast. Dick Willard, I take my hat off to you for that long gait. I could have used it. But we had lots of miles in us. We had tried to do a 50-mile last year, got canceled because of an ice storm. I broke my toe, I canceled a 50-mile. We've got some marathons and some 50Ks under our belt. So I think our training was pretty good. I might do some longer runs in practice than we had done. But I don't know, maybe try to go find some trails and actually do more of the grass stuff. Certainly if we're going to do something technical, have to, do that, a little bit more strength training. Nathan, my strength coach here, I'm sure he would agree that that's probably something that needs to do maybe to keep my hip flexors. I think it's, again, moving, I was fine. Stop, I stiffened up. I think, body and motion. I think that, one thing this taught me is we can go a lot longer than we anticipate that we can. I've talked to people about wellness and movement and the practice, and people get sore. And there's a fear as we get older that we're going to hurt ourselves and that we're going to put ourselves out commission. You hear people say, I ripped my quad or I tore my knee and I can't do anything else. And they have this concept or this story that they tell themselves that they're broken and they can't do anything because they broke themselves. And if they try to do it again, it's going to break. And I think that's false. I see it time and time again with other people that I admire. They come back from what you would think would be severely limiting injuries to do great things. And so I think we limit ourselves way too much. I think noticing the difference between a little bit of pain and injury. I was not injured when my knee hurt. It was just a little discomfort, muscle spasm. I don't know what it was, but even when my back tightened up, there was nothing horrible going on. I didn't ever limp. I didn't ever lose control of myself, as far as moving. Things weren't collapsing. So I think that, we're able to do a lot more than we give ourselves credit for, or maybe, I think that there's a lot of fear that's unlimited. I think this trail running, the one thing I love about it is the camaraderie. Even though we were older than a lot of people there, people were smiling. People said good job anytime you passed somebody or they passed you. The aid station people were wonderful, pleasant. You were out in the middle of nowhere. You were pushing yourself to limits beyond what you thought you could do or even had experienced before. The furthest I've ever run up until that week was 32 miles, 33 miles. And when you're at that point, you're vulnerable, and but there's a kind of everybody's vulnerable together. Everybody is struggling together. and it makes for a great camaraderie. I think even Michael and I are closer after having struggled through that together. Lord knows we've done some crazy things together. But, we had the discussion while we were out there, do you want to stop? You're going to regret it if you're not so sick that it's dangerous just to throw in the towel because the time is not what we wanted would be, we would regret it. So we didn't want to do that. There was no way in the world I was going to leave him and finish, quicker or leave him behind. That wasn't going to happen. Didn't matter to me. The idea was for us to finish and finish together. We're a team, and that's, that's priceless. As far as pushing, as you're getting older, I think it's a way of cleaning out the garage. I give a lecture and I tell people that our cells are like garages, that over time we accumulate metabolic waste. And that's really what causes our cells to start to decline and bad things start to happen. And it truly is aging, is when we just have so much gunk in our cells that they can't function appropriately. And I think getting out and running an endurance event where you take your glycogen stores down to zip and you push yourself to limits of exhaustion or being very fatigued, that you're kind of cleaning out your garage. I don't think it's destructive. I think it is reparative. I did not change my intake before the race. I did not change my intake after the race. I eat fruit, greens, things of color. I wasn't more hungry after the race than I am after any other race. I didn't eat terrible food afterwards. I just ate good food to try to refuel myself because I cleaned my garage out. I want to put good stuff back in. If you want to know positivity, go run an ultra, because you'll see lots of people that are can-do people. I think we were designed to move. We were designed to be perpetually moving, and that sitting is probably the worst thing that we can do. Stopping is definitely the worst thing we can do. I can't wait to do it again. I can't wait for our next challenge to be at 10,000 plus feet of elevation and see how that goes. I look forward to meeting more people on the trail, sharing more stories. If you would like to push the limits, live large, live healthy, go over to drdulaney.com, DOCTORDULANEY, and check out the website. You're never too old, or maybe you're old enough that you should clean out your garage with an endurance event, and it's never too old to start living large again. Good for the mind, good for the body. Thank you, Rob Goyen, for putting on a wonderful, wonderful race. Thank you, Michael, for running with me. Thanks, Addie, Nathan, and Kayla for being at the being a great finish line with posters and lots of smiles. Makes it all worthwhile. Thanks, Nathan and Addie and Kayla, for hosting us after the race. And on Sunday, we went to an Easter egg hunt and walked around, and it was quite fun and quite humorous to see us kind of gimping around a little bit, but it was great to get moving. So if you have any questions, email me at jami@drdulaney.com. It was a pleasure sharing my race with you. Talk to you soon. Thanks for listening. P.S. I didn't get bit by a gator. I didn't have to jump over one. I didn't have to go around the backside. I was happy about that.